through those resolutions brought by those chiefs and proxies who were able to meet the deadline, which allows for better processing, then we will get to that. And as I've said, our record is 73 resolutions, I believe, and so we will again drive as hard as we can to to achieve all of the resolutions that we have before you. Microphone 2, even though we are not in session, Chief.
I just heard your nice rant about how we're going to get through all these resolutions. My history always shows me we lose quorum, and there's threat of that. I think a lot of people are here today seeking support from the AFN, so I would like to propose we pull all of these support resolutions together and omnibus those resolutions so we can give adequate time to those that may have presentations they want to make. I think that's a better use of our time, just in keeping with trying to finish the resolutions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would note that we've done one omnibus resolution, and they are looking at to see if there's some other support resolutions that can be grouped together, and so the resolutions committee will handle that. And by the way, even doing that really does not free up much more time on the podium for speakers, but I really appreciate the advice. Thank you very much, Chief. Chief Solomon, are you in the room to just invite us to the Treaty 1 through 11 gathering? Microphone 4, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ugimakanak, Ishiak, Squeak, Skatisak. Good morning, everybody, chiefs, women, elders, young people. I'm here to, first of all, I'd like to say that it's an honor to be here on the Treaty 4 territory. I'm from the Treaty 9 area, known as Anishinaabe territory, or Mushkegowuk Aski, where I'm from. I just wanted to take this time to inform the chiefs, the delegates, that there will be a national gathering of Treaties 1 to 11 in Cochrane, Ontario on August 28, 29, and 30th for 3 days. And we're inviting the number of treaties to be there in this national gathering. And also, it'll be hosted by one of our member First Nations in our tribal area, known as TTN, or Taku Tagamau First Nation. And during the day, for the 3 days, there's going to be discussion on treaty relationships, water, the secretness of the water, the promises, the oral promises that were made. And in the evenings, we invite you to take part in we have a Cree Fest, we call it. It's a celebration of our culture, our language, our foods. That's all we eat in that celebration, and it's going to happen during that gathering. You're probably going to see me on the floor doing my step dancing. And mark your calendars. You can drive in. You can drive in. It's Cochrane, Ontario. There's also going to be, for those people that are going to be using trailer homes, there's going to be some areas where you can park your trailer homes during that time. So with that, again, I invite you to the National Treaties 1 to 11 gathering in our territory, Mushkegowuk Aski, to come and join us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chief Solomon. Thank you very much for your help last night. It is 1:07. We are now back in session as an assembly, and so welcome back to the delegations. I want to urge those of you who are in the conventions area and in the caucuses to please return to the assembly hall as promptly as possible. Just as a note, the chief spoke earlier to remind us and to urge us to find shortcuts to the resolutions. I would note two things. quorum is reset after we recess, so we will have a new number on quorum shortly. And as well, what I would suggest we do in the resolutions is let's dispense with the supportive comments by the mover and seconder if it's permissible to you, and just move quickly to the discussion if there is any on the floor, and then the call for the consensus. That'll all let's move through that, and we have used that in previous meetings. By order of our agenda, we are at the environmental and regulatory review. I wanted to thank the 3 regional chiefs involved in that in terms of targeting and identifying yesterday that Regional Chief Day would do the context setting for these resolutions. However, again, they're tied up, and we are moving things around pretty rapidly today. And so let us turn to draft resolution 7.
We're going to do 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 as the omnibus.
Okay, and can I have 7? Where is 7? I had them here, and what did I do with it?
Did you just mess up with my file?
I've got 8.
I had them all grouped together.
Yeah, I
You took
grabbed
my
them.
file- Yep, but they're all
But-
right there.
But I don't have 7. I don't have 7. I need 7.
I've got it right here.
Okay. And so we can do, which in omnibus?
7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Okay, all right, so there are lots of therefore be it resolves in the environmental resolutions, and so while we had thought about bundling them, I think it's better that we move through them. In the 5 resolutions we have, there's probably almost 30 therefore be it resolved, so let's do that. So Resolution 7, resetting the role of First Nations in environmental and regulatory reviews, moved by Chief Byron Lewis, who's present, and seconded by Chief Sanderson, who is not in the room at the moment that I see. And so may I have a seconder for Resolution 7? May I have Russell Dybel, proxy for Wolf Lake? Thank you very much, Russell. You have the resolution in your package. Therefore, be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly reaffirm the Assembly of First Nations position that the current engagement process cannot be construed as consultation and fails to meet the free, prior, and informed consent standard, and that additional time must be afforded to consult directly with rights holders in a manner that is respectful of their unique protocols, processes, and elements. Direct the AFN to press the Prime Minister and the Federal Cabinet to extend the timelines in order to take into consideration the need for a First Nation-specific parallel process that fully respects the constitutional and other legal obligations of the Crown, including the minimum standards set by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. 3, support the following interim principles to strengthen and improve federal environmental and regulatory processes consistent with the long-term vision of First Nations self-determination and autonomy. A, ensure the inherent rights, title, and jurisdiction of First Nations as governing authorities are recognized, including their decision-making powers using a one-assessment approach. B, respect the free, prior, and informed consent standard throughout a full and honorable joint process. C, rights-based collaboration and jurisdiction-based engagement with First Nations in decision-making. D, mandatory inclusion of traditional knowledge when shared and following the OCAP, ownership, control, access, and possession principles. E, ensure adequate core capacity arrangements. F, recognize and support First Nations-led assessments. 4, continue to support the interventions of First Nations, regional organizations, and provincial territorial organizations to strengthen and improve the federal environmental and regulatory process, and call on all responsible ministries to concretely demonstrate where First Nations comments and ideas have been implemented. With the permission of the mover and seconder, we will move to see if there's any need for discussion of this resolution on the floor. Seeing no one moving to the microphones, then may I ask if there is any opposition to draft resolution 7? Seeing and hearing none, is there any abstentions from draft resolution 7? Seeing and hearing none, then with your permission, chiefs and proxies, we declare that resolution 7 is adopted by consensus. Thank you very much.
Turning now to draft resolution number 8, addressing the shortcomings in the review of the Navigation Protection Act. This was moved by Chief Dalton Silver of Sumas First Nation and seconded by Chief Scott McCod of Nipissing First Nation. Is Dalton here? So I'm just looking to see if we have a mover and a seconder here. Okay, and I can't see. can't hear either. Either louder or go to my, preference would be the microphone, please. Chief Scott McLeod? Thank you. I can see you now. So are you comfortable for moving that then if we don't have Chief Dalton Silver in the room? Oh, where are you? If you could please stand up. Pardon me, Chief Dalton Silver. Two men in black in the dark. It's we won't say anything about stature. We'll just blame the black clothing. Thank you so much, and my eyes. Thank you so very much to the two gentlemen here. So turning to, therefore be it resolved. Pour ces motifs, les chefs en assemblée.
So therefore be it resolved that the chiefs in assembly call on the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, to continue to advocate that any legislative policy and program reform to the Navigation Protection Act must respect First Nation treaties, rights, title and jurisdiction, and recognize First Nation responsibilities to their traditional territories. 2. Direct the AFN to urge the federal government to provide a firm commitment to core funding for First Nations that goes beyond Indigenous participating funding and that supports the joint responsibility of navigation issues with First Nations. 3. Mandate the AFN to call on the federal government to implement joint navigation management with First Nations as equal partners. 4. Mandate the AFN to call on the federal government to answer how the recommendations by First Nations in the ongoing review process have been considered and will be integrated into proposed legislative, policy and program reforms in relation to the Navigation Protection Act. 5. Mandate the AFN to pursue joint legislative drafting and/or a parallel legislative reform process specifically for Indigenous peoples to address issues specific to First Nations waterways and to hold the federal government accountable in addressing First Nations interests into the Navigation Protection Act and its accompanying regulations and policies. And 6. Mandate the AFN to call on Prime Minister Trudeau and the Government of Canada to work jointly with First Nations in a full review of the legislation unilaterally imposed on Indigenous peoples, as well as to call on the Prime Minister to ensure that the required mechanisms and processes are in place to ensure legislation is not unilaterally imposed on Indigenous peoples.
Men in black, for identifying yourself earlier, and may we dispense with any remarks on this, just turning to you right now. I see some movement going on. Do you need to go to microphone number 4, please? Microphone 4, please.
Yeah. Thanks, Roussel. Chief Dalton Silver, Sumas. We've had some sessions in the last couple of nights here with the Fisheries Committee and with the Environment Committee, and we revamped some of these resolutions where we had a good cross-section of representatives across the country to make it a little stronger in the protection of our inherent rights. And I have a copy in front of me of the edited version, and we were to understand that it was going to be put up on the screen, but I guess it didn't happen. I was talking to some of the colleagues back here that we need to present the edited version, I believe.
If you want to read into record, or I can read it into the record as you wish. Okay,
well, it's a little bit of reading on the therefore it be resolved.
Or my co-chair can read into record. He's a very fast speaker.
This is, see, we got a lot in here. You see a little bit? Yeah, the underlined words, and there are little pieces that are. Strikeouts? Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you.
All right. We do have the changes, and we regret that it did not make it to the screen or to ourselves in the update. So, yes. So resolution, so I'm just going to read it very quickly in English for the full, therefore be it resolved. Call on the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, to continue to advocate that any legislative, policy, or program reforms to the Navigation Protections Act must respect First Nations' inherent rights, treaty, titles, and jurisdictions, and must recognize the inherent and everlasting responsibility of First Nations to their traditional territories, including First Nations laws, governance, management systems. 2, the AFN to direct the federal government to provide First Nations with a share of the core funding that goes beyond Indigenous participant funding and that supports a joint responsibility of navigation issues with First Nations. 3, mandate the AFN to call on the federal government to recognize and respect First Nations governance and jurisdiction over territorial waters or joint navigation management with First Nations as equal partners where appropriate. 4, mandate the AFN to call on the federal government to answer how the recognition of First Nations jurisdiction in the ongoing review process has been considered and will be integrated into proposed legislative policy and program reforms related to the Navigation Protection Act. 5, mandate the AFN to pursue joint legislative drafting and or parallel legislative reform process, specifically for First Nations, to address issues specific to First Nations waterways and to hold the federal government accountable in addressing First Nations interest in the Navigation Protection Act and its accompanying regulations and policies. And 5, mandate the AFN to call on Prime Minister Trudeau and the Government of Canada to work jointly with First Nations in a full review of the legislation unilaterally imposed on Indigenous peoples, where there are contradictions, as well as to call on the Prime Minister to ensure that the required mechanisms and processes are in place to ensure legislations are not unilaterally imposed on Indigenous people. So with these changes read into the record, do we have any need for any further comment from our mover or seconder at this time? Do not see you approaching. Okay, we got him covered. Yep, so we have Chief Dalton going back to microphone 4, please.
Thanks, Roussel, and sorry to the floor for the confusion here. On the title, I think you'll see there's a change on the title too, and it may be similar to another one I have here that's respecting the inherent rights.
Yes, and there has been some changes to the whereas, but I'll just read the new title: Respecting Inherent Rights and Jurisdiction over Waters in Parallel with the Review of Canada's Navigation Protection Act. And it was moved from Environment into Fisheries.
Yes.
And there was a C added, I believe. Was C added in for your whereas?
Yes, I think regarding seeking free, prior, and informed permission of the First Nation.
That's correct. So the Crown has a clear duty to seek the free, prior, and informed permission of First Nations on matters impacting First Nations' inherent right. This includes providing input to the changes made in law, policies, and programs that infringe or may infringe on inherent treaty rights. So that was replaced in the previous C. Under F, you had quite a bit of change. I'll just read for the record. First Nations support a continued parallel approach on Navigation Protection Act legislative review or jointly where appropriate. You had an added J and a K, or J and K were changed. So J was changed and a K was added. So the J was a structured legislative review process has failed to recognize our existing and established First Nations law and jurisdiction in a First Nations specific process commensurate with the constitutionally protected nature of First Nations right and has improperly heard the view of right holders alongside stakeholders. And K, the NPA does not currently address First Nations inherent treaty rights, claims jurisdiction, interest in relation to navigation. The lack of protections provided to waters in First Nation territories prevent First Nations from being able to exercise inherent treaty right. So with all of that, are we good to go, gentlemen? Yes, I got a thumbs up, and we got a hit. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Is there any need for any further discussion on draft resolution number 8 with the new title, Respecting Inherent Rights and Jurisdiction over Waters in Parallel with the Review of Canada's Navigation Protection Act? Questions been called? Is there any opposition to resolution number 8? Any abstentions? So with your permission, I declare here and here that we have consensus on resolution 8. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn your attention to Resolution 9 in your package, addressing the shortcomings of the review of the Fisheries Act. Chief McLeod and Chief Silver being present in the room. The resolution speaks to the legislative review of the Fisheries Act announced in 2016 and the fact that the AFN has passed 5 resolutions in recent years on that legislative review, and that the First Nations are deeply disappointed and dissatisfied with the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Action and Oceans Review and Process Report, particularly its lack of responses to the issues the First Nations have raised and the call for a First Nations specific process. And so therefore be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly call on the Assembly of First Nations to continue to advocate that any legislative policy and program reforms to the Fisheries Act must respect First Nations treaties, rights, title, and jurisdiction, and recognize First Nations responsibilities to their traditional territories. 2, direct the AFN to urge the federal government to provide a firm commitment to core funding for First Nations that goes beyond Indigenous participant funding and that supports the joint responsibility of fisheries issues with First Nations. 3, mandate the AFN to call on the federal government to implement joint fisheries management with First Nations as equal partners. 4, mandate the AFN to call on the federal government to answer how the positions and perspectives of First Nations in the ongoing review process have been considered and will be integrated into proposed legislative policy and program reforms in relation to the Fisheries Act, and mandate the AFN to pursue legislative drafting and or parallel legislative reform process specifically for Indigenous peoples, which will work to address issues specific to First Nations fisheries and to hold the federal government accountable in respecting First Nations rights into the Fisheries Act and its accompanying regulations and process. The mover and seconder are at microphone 4.
Okay, should we just tell them? Thanks, Harold. A lot similar to the one that we just passed, and I thank the floor for passing that, because a lot of us in our territories are going to be going through a second round of engagement with the government, and these will be great support for us. But and again, the edited version has not made it up to the front there, and I'll pass it on to Rissel, but the changes are very similar to the one that we just passed, and to be more reflective and a lot stronger in protecting the rights of everyone across Turtle Island. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I do note the change in title to respecting inherent rights-based fisheries in parallel with the review of the Canadian Fisheries Act. I note a amendment in whereas C to, and the underlined words are, so beginning that the Crown has underlined clear duty to seek free, prior, and informed permission of First Nations. And this includes providing input into any changes made to law and policy. So just an adjustment on that language. An adjustment in the language in E, just to delete the word all. An adjustment in F to delete the words from the efforts all the way down to and support a continued, and to add the words just a continued. Or so, okay, so to end at support, keep a continued, and then delete joint approach, and just to, so a continued parallel approach. And then to add some language on the fisheries legislative review or jointly where appropriate. And then on J, a few wording changes to add the structure of the legislative review process has failed to recognize our existing and established First Nations laws and jurisdictions in a First Nations specific process. So a slight adjustment there. Just so you know, the Resolutions Committee does have this, and it's there. And then some edits in the therefore be it resolved. So in number 1, we are adding in the second line after First Nations, the word inherent rights. We say treaties, we delete the word rights, we say title and jurisdiction, and we add the word must recognize First Nations, inherent and everlasting responsibilities. In 2, we delete the word direct and add the word mandate. We delete the word urge and add the word direct. We delete the word a firm commitment and add First Nations with a share of the core funding. We delete the word to core funding for First Nations. And 3, we add the words after the federal call on the federal government to recognize and respect First Nations jurisdiction over fisheries, or delete the word implement, and then further down in that sentence, add the words where appropriate. In 4, we add the words First Nations jurisdiction over fisheries in the end of that first line. 5, we change Indigenous peoples to First Nations, and then we adjust the wording there to say that First Nations will address issues specific to First Nations fisheries and will integrate respect for the inherent right of First Nations to govern fisheries into the Fisheries Act. And then in final there, and whereas therefore be it resolved, at the end of the second line we add the words where there are contradictions. So with those amendments, Chief McLeod. Number 4, sorry Chief, microphone 4.
Miigwech. Just my apologies as well on how this has come to you. I have reviewed it with the changes in the clean form, and I'm just wondering if maybe you can read that. So it's confusing over here for the ones that haven't really seen it before. If you can read it in the clean version that we passed up.
Do we have the clean version? Yeah, the version so try to, okay. Read the therefore be it resolves. All right, let me try that then. So I will read them. They are very similar words, but, and with the adjustments. So number 1, call on the Assembly of First Nations to continue to advocate that any legislative, policy, and program reforms to the Fisheries Act must respect First Nations' inherent rights, treaties, title, and jurisdiction, and must recognize First Nations' inherent and everlasting responsibilities to their traditional territories. 2, mandate the AFN to direct the federal government to provide First Nations with a share of the core funding that goes beyond Indigenous participant funding and that supports the joint responsibility of fisheries issues with First Nations. 3, mandate the AFN to call on the federal government to recognize and respect First Nations jurisdictions over fisheries or joint fisheries management with First Nations as equal partners where appropriate. 4, mandate the AFN to call on the federal government to answer how First Nations jurisdiction over fisheries and the positions and perspectives of First Nations in the ongoing review process have been considered and will be integrated into proposed legislative, policy, and program reforms in relation to the Fisheries Act. 5, mandate the AFN to pursue legislative drafting and or a parallel legislative reform process specifically for First Nations that will address issues specific to First Nations fisheries and will integrate respect for the inherent right of First Nations to govern fisheries into the Fisheries Act. And 6, mandate the AFN to call on Prime Minister Trudeau and the Government of Canada to work jointly with First Nations in a full review of legislation unilaterally imposed on Indigenous peoples where there are contradictions, as well as to call on Prime Minister to ensure that the required mechanisms and processes are in place to ensure legislation is not unilaterally imposed on Indigenous peoples. Movers and seconder being present, the proper wording being read into the record. Is there need for discussion on Resolution 9? Seeing none and hearing the question, is there any opposition to Resolution 9 as amended? Seeing none, are there any abstentions to Resolution number 9 as amended? Therefore, with your permission, we declare that Resolution 9 as amended in the title whereases and therefore be resolved is adopted by consensus. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. And moving on to resolution number 10, Joint Committee on Climate Change. This was moved by Chief Calvin Sanderson, who I see right here from Chicasa Basin, First Nation, Saskatchewan, and seconded by Chief Aaron Sam of the Lower Nicola. And I don't know if he's still with us. So if he's not here, we're looking for a seconder. So we're looking, okay, can you just, there you go. Microphone, thank you.
Chief Lee Spahan, Quarter Band.
Thank you, Chief Lee Spahan, Coldwater. Thank you very much. So turning to the therefore be it resolved. Should be on right in English, comme d'habitude en français à ma gauche. Pour ces motifs.
So, therefore, be it resolved that the chiefs in assembly support the establishment of the Joint Committee on Climate Action between the First Nations and the Government of Canada to ensure First Nations full and meaningful inclusion with the Pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change and other related priorities identified by First Nations. To direct the Assembly of First Nations to ensure regional First Nation representatives are appointed to the GCCA in order to reflect regional differences and concern, as well as coordinate regional engagement opportunities for First Nations. 3, direct the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, to urge all ministers involved in climate action to ensure the full and effective participation of traditional knowledge holders in all aspects of climate action, including mitigation and adaptation, with equal weight given as that of Western science. 4, direct the AFN to call upon the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada, ECCC, to provide adequate financial capacity to support First Nations regions, provincial and territorial organizations, as well as women, elders, and youth to participate in these activities and to maintain their important role as stewards of the environment in successfully managing Canada's climate change. And 5, direct the AFN to call upon the Prime Minister, Minister of Environment, and Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada to support First Nations and provide financial resources for assessments of climate change impacts and for the preparation and implementation of mitigation and adaptive measures.
Chief Kawasaki, well, microphone number 4 for him, please.
We just have a few amendments that Graham will come up there and show you. Number 1 and a few other wordings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, welcome, Graham. Okay. So I'm going to read them in English as they're presented to me into the record. Therefore, be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly direct the Assembly of First Nations to reiterate their commitment to a First Nations-led climate strategy and instruct the AFN staff to begin coordinating regional discussions to this effect. 2, support the establishment of the Joint Committee on Climate Action, JCCA, between First Nations and the Government of Canada to ensure First Nations full and meaningful inclusion with the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change, PCF, and other related priorities identified by First Nations based on their inherent rights, titles, treaties, and other formal arrangements. 3, direct the Assembly of First Nations to ensure regional First Nations representatives are appointed to the JCCA in order to reflect regional differences and concerns, as well as coordinate regional engagement opportunities for First Nations. 4, direct the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, to urge all ministers involved in climate action to ensure the full and effective participation of the AFN Elders Council and other traditional knowledge holders in all aspects of climate action, including mitigation adoption, with equal weight given as that of Western science. 5, direct the AFN to call on the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, ECCC, to provide adequate financial capacity to support First Nations, regions, provincial and territorial organizations, and women, elders, and youth to participate in these activities and maintain their important role as stewards of the environment in successfully managing Canada's climate action. 6, direct the AFN to call upon the Prime Minister, Minister of Environment, Minister of Indigenous Northern Affairs Canada to support First Nations to provide financial resources for assessments of climate change impacts and for the preparation and implementation of mitigation and adaptive measures. That's it. Okay. Thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. Chief Sanderson, is there any further comment from yourself or from Lee, Chief Lee? We're good? Thumbs up, thumbs up. Any need for any further discussion on draft resolution number 10, Joint Committee on Climate Change, with the couple of those friendly revisions made to the therefore be it resolved? Seeing none, moving on to see if there's any abstentions to this. Any opposition to draft resolution number 10? Therefore, with your permission, I declare it here, here, and here, moved by consensus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiefs and Proxies. Let us now move to Resolution 11. Just as we do, I do want to remind the delegation that for the first time they're doing a gathering in Treaty 10, and there is a donation spot over there. I want to encourage your generosity on that today. We are not going to have time, that's our challenge, to do the blanket dance and proceed through. I will let you know that we have done well beyond 20 resolutions so far, and so we're moving very quickly. Title, Parks Canada Pathway to Canada Target 1, Conservation 2020 Initiatives. Chief Dalton Silver being present, Chief Byron Lewis was present a second ago. Chief Lewis, are you still in the room? He just stepped out? Oh, there he is. Thank you very much. You moved on me. All right, so this one notes that the AFN has already agreed to participate in Conservation 2020 and that it's really a part at your direction to build that a relationship on environmental conservation as a part of our nation-to-nation relationship. And it notes that relative to that, First Nations have experienced infringements, they've experienced some extraordinary impacts on their conservation, and there is a desire for fair and reasonable compensation. So therefore, be it resolved, the Chiefs and Assembly support the Assembly of First Nations involvement in the Pathway Canada Target 1 Conservation 2020 initiative, including but not limited to that of the National Advisory Panel, National Steering Committee, and the Indigenous Circle of Experts. 2, direct the Assembly of First Nations to engage with the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Chief Executive Officer of Parks Canada in order to participate in the Pathway to Canada Target 1 Conservation 2020 initiative. 3, urge the responsible ministers and their respective departments and agencies to meaningfully engage, consult, and accommodate First Nations interests and concerns in all legislative, regulatory, policy, and program decisions, including the creation of opportunities for dialogue with all levels of government. 4, urge the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Parks Canada Agency to ensure the full and effective participation of traditional knowledge holders in all aspects of conservation with equal weight given to that of Western science. And 5, urge the responsible ministers and their respective departments and agencies to support the full and effective participation of First Nations in the development and implementation of all conservation activities related to the environment, species, and habitat located on federal lands. Microphone 4 for a comment.
Yes, Cookby Christian, I guess the number 3, the therefore be it resolved when we're talking, and I know we always get into the discussion, First Nations, what does it mean? For us as a Secwepemc people, we don't view an Indian band as a First Nation. The actual nation is the 32 communities and 17 Indian bands. So I'm wondering in terms of the language, how can we address that Parks Canada needs to really address the interests of the Secwepemc nation and the nations in those parks. Because we have in our traditional territory, we've got Jasper, Banff, Glacier, we've got a number of national parks in the territory. And we're actually in discussions with them right now around the twinning of a road going through the MOT, not through MOTI, but through the parks. So how does the AFN address that? How would you define that in terms of the term First Nations? I think there's got to be some language change so it addresses the issues in relation to the UN Declaration and the legal language that's emerging around Indigenous nations.
Okay. So then, did you want to, is it permissible just to switch first for Indigenous, or did you want something different? Indigenous is good? So with the permission of the mover and seconder, in number 3 in the middle, we would say consult and accommodate Indigenous nations' interests and concerns in all legislative and policy matters. Mover and seconder, that's permissible? Good? Where's my mover? Oh, there he is. Moved again. With that, is there need for further discussion of Resolution 11 with the one amendment? Any opposition? Any abstentions? Then, by consensus, draft Resolution 11 is adopted. Thank you.
Moving on to draft resolution number 34, prohibit oil and gas exploration and development in the sacred calving grounds of the Porcupine Caribou Herd. This was moved by Chief Bruce Charlie of the Winnet-Gwich'in First Nation in the Yukon and seconded by Deputy Chief Jordan Peterson of the Gwich'in Tribal Council, NWT. So, do we have a, oh, all right, we're going to go to microphone number 4, please. We're just looking for the mover and the seconder. If there's any proposed changes, we'll get to it, but you identify yourself. Are you the mover and seconder? Is this for comment or is this for changes?
No, just a comment.
Okay, so we'll get to you. So we're looking first and foremost for the mover and the seconder at this time. So we're seeing if the Chief Bruce Charlie is here or Deputy Chief Jordan Peterson or other people to move or second at this time. The microphone 4, please.
We have a change to the seconder.
Oh, well, that's very welcome. So we're looking for a mover. All right, you're the mover. Yes, please, come on forward.
Millie Olson, Deputy Chief of First Nation of Natchunagdun, proxy.
Millie Wilson?
Olson?
Olson, thank you. Did you get the community? Did you get the community? Okay, and so for the seconder, sir, can you please present yourself?
I'm the mover, Chief Bruce Charlie.
I'm sorry, I totally misunderstood you. So Chief Bruce Charlie, and then we have Millie Olson. I'll dial back on the caffeine. Thank you very much. So going to the mover and the seconder, did you have some changes to this document? No, all right, so we will move to the therefore be it resolved. So again, it's the prohibit oil and gas exploration and development in the sacred calving grounds of the Porcupine Caribou Herd. Right will be the English, et je vais le lire en français. Pour ces motifs, le chef en assemblée demande au chef national de l'Assemblée des Premières Nations, APN, d'exhorter le Congrès des États-Unis et les présidents des États-Unis à reconnaître le droit ancestral des Gwich'in et de maintenir leur mode de vie et de poursuivre leurs relations sacrées avec le herd de caribou de la Porcupine en empêchant l'exploration et l'exploitation pétrolière et gazière dans la réserve faunique et nationale de l'Arctique. 2. Soutient les Gwich'in pour tous les moyens diplomatiques nationaux et internationaux.
Support the Gwich'in through available domestic and international diplomatic avenues in their efforts to raise awareness of this international human rights issue and to prohibit oil and gas exploration and development within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And 3, direct the national chief to communicate with the Prime Minister of Canada and the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada, calling for an ongoing commitment to the support and continued protection of the sacred calving grounds of the Porcupine Caribou Herd.
Comment at this time on this resolution number 34. Seeing none, with your permission, move to see if there are any abstentions to resolution number 34. See some movement coming to microphone 4? No, okay, just waving. Hello. So, any opposition to resolution number 34? So with your permission, here, I declare it passed by consensus. Thank you.
As a part of the environmental bundle, I turn you to draft resolution 36, support for the Bushi petition against systemic discrimination in Crown processes. Chief Roger Redmond and Chief Francis Iron, Standing Buffalo and Canoe Lake, are you present in the assembly? And if not, may we have a mover and seconder for resolution 36? Chief Sanderson will move that for us, please. Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Chief Christian? Splatseem? Just better check. Seems we've had this issue before. No, even not. All right. On this resolution, therefore be it resolved that the Chiefs and Assembly support the petition of the Boucher family and encourage First Nations leadership to attend and support the Boucher family during the upcoming trial. direct the Assembly of First Nations Executive to express their full support of the Boucher petition to the federal and provincial governments, and direct the AFN Executive to continue to press for change in the education and respect for First Nations rights. Microphone 4.
Bonjour. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Lene Kus, Sagamay First Nations, Treaty 4 territory. I, first of all, want to say to the Assembly, welcome to Treaty 4 territory. I want to acknowledge our prayers and our sacred objects here at our Assembly. I just want to say that I've been working with a few people to enable the Bushy family to be able to speak to the Assembly. I was going to give them my time, but because we are not following the order of the resolutions, I am not able to give my microphone time to the Bushy family to be able to speak to this resolution. And I want to apologize on behalf of this Assembly for not giving opportunity for this family to be able to speak, so that the voices of this family are present in the Assembly. Miigwech.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chief. And of course, you speak on all our behalf when you offer those apologies. And so you'll note that it is about one of those far too common incidences where we have racist violence directed against our families and lack of support when they're in the criminal justice system. Is there a need for further discussion on this support resolution for the Boucher family? Seeing none, is there any opposition? Seeing none, are there any abstentions? And then thank you very much for your support for this family. Resolution 36 is adopted.
I'd like to thank both Regional Chief Hart and Regional Chief Mackinac for dispensing with the remarks on water, housing, infrastructure, and emergency management, so that we may go directly to the resolutions. So we're going to be handling Resolution 13, 14, and 15. I'll be commencing with Resolution number 13, which is the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act, or Loi sur la salubrité, l'eau potable des Premières Nations. The mover on this is Chief Lance Haymond of Quebec First Nation in Quebec, and seconded. Okay, thank you very much. And Chief Dan George from Burns Lake Indian Band. And are you okay? Thank you very much as well. So you're both present. Moving into the therefore be it resolved. Pour ces motifs, le chef en Assemblée enjoint à l'Assemblée des Premières Nations APN de demander immédiatement au cabinet du Premier ministre et à la ministre des Affaires autochtones du Nord du Canada de reconnaître la résolution 76-2015 de l'APN qui appelle à l'abrogation de la loi de salubrité de l'eau potable des Premières Nations, LSEPPN. 2. Enjoint l'APN de demander immédiatement au gouvernement fédéral d'arrêter les séances d'engagement sur l'examen de la LSEPPN et de travailler directement avec les Premières Nations à la définition des prochaines étapes appropriées, menant un processus législatif conjoint qui sera entièrement élaboré en partenariat avec les Premières Nations et qui respectera les droits des Premières Nations. 3. Appelle le gouvernement fédéral à élaborer en partenariat avec les Premières Nations une loi appropriée sur l'approvisionnement sécuritaire en eau potable qui respecte les droits des Premières Nations. Cela comprend l'évaluation des fonds nécessaires pour l'investissement en capital, un financement d'exploitation et entretien du personnel de la formation pour toutes les communautés des Premières Nations pour améliorer l'état des réseaux des eaux des Premières Nations, tout en élaborant un nouveau cadre législatif. Et 4, appuie entièrement l'action en justice de la Nation Cree Ermiskin, des Premières Nations Kainai, Chibougamau des Bloods, de la Nation Tsuut'ina et de la Première Nation de Sucker Creek, qui vise à inscrire les droits d'eau potable pour toutes les Premières Nations dans le droit canadien et encourage les autres Premières Nations ayant des problèmes d'eau potable à se joindre à l'action en justice. So turning to our mover and a seconder, I identified, do you have need for any further remark to resolution, draft resolution number 13? No, thank you, gentlemen. Is there need for any further discussion on draft resolution number 13? Questions been called. Thank you very much. Is there any abstentions to resolution 13? Seeing none. Any opposition to resolution 13? Seeing none, with your permission, here, and here, we declare it passed by consensus. Thank you.
Chiefs and proxies, I ask you to turn your attention to Resolution 14, Draft Resolution 14, the development of a First Nations National Housing and Infrastructure Strategy, moved by Chief Burns, seconded by Chief
L'élaboration d'une stratégie sur le logement et les infrastructures des Premières Nations. Logement. Donc, les résolutions, c'était pour établir un protocole et une stratégie pour l'infrastructure, pour le logement, pour avoir donné le contrôle aux Premières Nations. Et en regardant la CHL et ce que les affaires indiennes font, travaillant en collaboration avec ce comité, parce qu'il y a un travail collaboratif de la collaboration qui se fait, et en travaillant avec les autres ministères. Donc, à ce moment-là, qu'il soit enjoint l'Assemblée Première Nation Comité des chefs sur le logement et l'infrastructure de rédiger conjointement avec le gouvernement fédéral un mandat de mettre sur pied un groupe de travail conjoint qui élabore une stratégie nationale sur le logement. Enjoindre la PN de signaler au gouvernement du Canada que tous les projets de loi, de règlements et d'instruments de politique consacrant la position stratégique nationale du logement et des infrastructures de première devront être élaborées en collaboration avec l'APN et le CCLI, que toute nouvelle loi issue de ces travaux d'élaboration conjointe devrait être ratifiée par les chefs en Assemblée avant d'être présentée à la Chambre des communes avec l'engagement d'effectuer des investissements à long terme pour les travaux prévus et c'est proposé justement qui a rapport avec toute la structure, l'infrastructure sur le logement. Et donc, tout ce qui résultera sera ratifié par les chefs en Assemblée avant de présenter à la Chambre des communes avec l'engagement d'effectuer des investissements à long terme pour les travaux prévus. Est-ce qu'on a besoin d'en discuter? Résolution numéro 14. J'ai-tu entendu une question? Est-ce qu'il y a de l'opposition? Des abstentions? Donc, avec permission, la résolution numéro 14 est adoptée. Maintenant, le numéro 15. Restitue aux Premières Nations la responsabilité des services techniques liés au programme de logement de la SCHL par Lance Seaman et Dan George, coproposeur. Alors, c'est comme avant, donc c'est facile, vous êtes encore au même endroit. Maintenant, nous allons passer, qu'il soit résolu. On voit que nous avons légèrement, je vais donc lire l'anglophone. Je n'ai pas... Je vais lire l'anglais. Donc, enjoindre l'Assemblée des Premières Nations de presser le ministre des Familles, Enfants et Développement social Canada, la Société canadienne d'hypothèque de logement, de ne pas renouveler le contrat loué à OZI, OZHI, First Nations Professional Services, et de rétablir les conventions, demande avec les Premières Nations, les conseils tribaux et les fournisseurs de services techniques de Premières Nations. Et qu'ils enjoignent l'APN d'exiger une consultation immédiate auprès des Premières Nations et de leur organisation en vue de conclure une entente sur l'avenir de ces services essentiels qui respectent et prend en compte le rôle et l'expérience des fournisseurs de services techniques désignés. Donc, le proposeur et le coproposeur, vous êtes là, debout. Je veux faire un petit changement dans les pourcents motifs parce que ça va avec les changements que nous avons. La SHL, on enlève le mot « restaurer », mais renégocier. Ça devrait être renégocier l'entente, renégocier l'entente. Au lieu de restaurer ou de l'entente qui était là auparavant. Est-ce qu'il y a de la discussion là-dessus? Est-ce que nécessaire d'en discuter? Est-ce qu'il y a des abstentions? Aucune. Opposition? Non. Donc, avec votre permission, donc, je le déclare adopté. Le 18, pour définir la citoyenneté et par le chef Peter Collins et Byron Lewis. Est-ce que si je ne vois les proposeurs et coproposeurs, je pourrais avoir quelqu'un pour proposer, coproposer? Correct. Donc, et l'avocat et les gens, c'était sur notre ordre du jour qui devait parler à ce sujet, mais ils ont décidé de ne pas faire la présentation, mais ils sont disponibles pour en parler avec eux sur ce sujet. C'est la compétence inhérente de définir la citoyenneté. Donc, pour ces motifs, confirme la compétence des Premières Nations de déterminer leur propre citoyenneté et admissibilité à leur statut d'Indien inscrit. Demande à l'Assemblée des Premières Nations d'exhorter le gouvernement à mettre un terme à la pratique de l'assimilation législative et octroyer un financement adéquat au gouvernement des Premières Nations pour qu'ils puissent établir leurs propres lois et processus en matière de citoyenneté. Et appuie les efforts de la Première Nation de Fort William et toutes les autres Premières Nations qui exercent désormais leurs compétences en matière de citoyenneté et rendent à leurs enfants leur patrimoine légitime perdu en raison des C1, des 601 et 62, en raison des reproductions coloniales et racistes des paragraphes 601 et 62 de la loi sur les Indiens. J'ai soulevé la question avec le ministre hier. Elle a évité d'y répondre véritable. J'ai eu une discussion avec la ministre Raybould. Elle veut savoir ce qu'on se fait, mais les avocats dont vous parlez, j'aimerais vraiment pouvoir leur parler parce qu'on va avoir besoin de leur aide pour faire pousser cet ordre du jour. Et une des choses que, de façon continue, les enfants sont perdus à cause de cette législation. Et on ne veut plus l'accepter. Alors, j'aimerais avoir le soutien des gouvernements là-dessus. Numéro 4, Don Miracle. Notre aînée, Teresa, voudrait en parler ici. Merci de me donner l'opportunité de parler à l'Assemblée des Premières Nations. Je suis vraiment préoccupée par cette question, surtout avec le S3 de cette loi, parce que nous, les femmes, nous sommes inquiets de nos enfants à venir, parce que mes enfants...
My grandchildren, their children may not be treaties any longer unless they marry First Nations. So we always talk about treaty rights, but we may not have any more treaty rights if we don't have any more Indians. So this really concerns me. So I've added an addition to this resolution, and I'm hoping that it will be, put in place. Marcicho.
Teresa, if you could just let us know what that addition is, and we'll make sure that... How would you like to be worded?
Yeah.
Okay. Just tell them what it is.
Yeah. I gave it to somebody to...
Jared, do we have the amendment that we're talking about here to Resolution 18? Let's go grab it. Teresa, we'll come down and grab the language from you. Yeah, we just want to make sure we have the language first. Chief Miracle, do you have the language there? Would you read it into the record? Okay.
I was just momentarily asked to have this presentation made.
Yep, thank you. 20 Wellington? Okay. So in the, oh. Okay. In the interest of time, let us table this briefly until that is adjusted, and we will come right back to it as soon as you are ready. And I ask the delegation to turn their attention to Resolution 20, 100 Wellington Street, moved by Chief Kirby White Duck, Algonquins of Pikwakanagan, and seconded by Chief Tom Brissett, Chippewas of Kettle and Stony Point. I know that Kirby has a proxy, Dan Kohoko, proxy for the Algonquins, are here present to my right. And this is in response to the June 21st announcement by the Prime Minister that 100 Wellington Street building has become a space for Indigenous people, and about the need for First Nations to establish their own process to determine that preferred use, function, and governance of that space, which includes the old customs building right across from Parliament, includes the building behind it, and includes the connecting lands behind it, all told somewhere in the neighborhood of 75,000 square acres, with the second building having the opportunity to build on that. I see the mover at microphone and seconders at microphone 2 for, well, let me read it into the record in my rush. Therefore, be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly mandate the Assembly of First Nations to initiate a process to determine the most effective use of the 100 Wellington Street space, and 2, direct the National Chief and the AFN to make sure that the appropriate protocols with the Algonquin Nation are engaged to ensure a respectful process is initiative. We were told in the dialogue session that work was being done to properly respect the title and participation of the Algonquin. Let us turn to the mover and seconder for those comments. Microphone 2.
Harold, as chair, there were some amendments that we proposed and are agreeable to.
Yep.
In the whereas, we've proposed a new B, so C and D. What's there now would move to C and D.
Thank you.
The new wording for B would be, the Algonquin Nation holds inherent title to their traditional lands, and, in quotes, the parliamentary precinct is located on unceded Algonquin territory. And in the therefore be it resolved, we've added a third. We would like to therefore be resolved that the Chiefs Assembly urge Canada to recognize the title of the Algonquin Nation and ensure the Algonquin Nation participates equally in the ongoing process to allow the building to ultimately be used as an Indigenous people's space in a manner which reflects and respects the engagement process with First Nations and the protocols of the Algonquin Nation. And then I also neglected to mention that we added another phrase onto therefore be resolved number 2. The added phrase is, at the end of it, is to and ensure Algonquin involvement. So those would be the way we would like to amend it, and I'll pass the this revised resolution to you.
And if I could get you just to repeat number 3.
We understand that I can understand that in this process, it was a surprise to us when the announcement came down, and but we found the announcement to be a good news story. We want to continue it as a good news story, and we do want the Grand Chief Perry to promote this forward for First Nations generally across Canada. And we're not going to stand in the way of that. I think that's what we would like to see happening with this one.
Thank you very much. Microphone 4.
Yes, Russell Daibo, proxy for Wolf Lake First Nation. This resolution with those amendments sound good, but I spoke with Chief St. Denis just a little while ago about this resolution. He didn't know about the amendments that are proposed. But he wanted in number 2, he wanted added in there to direct the National Chief and the AFN to recognize the duly recognized Algonquin First Nations. And he had also had the wording and to enter into an appropriate process on Algonquin rights and interests in the National Capital Region, including 100 Wellington Street. But I think the amendments that were just discussed cover that last part. Okay. So if the mover and seconder could add in there to recognize the National Chief and the AFN to recognize the duly recognized Algonquin First Nations, that would satisfy Chief St. Denis.
Okay. So just a brief addition then to number 2. Mover and seconder, are you okay with that? Dan, you're good with that? Thank you very much. And just for the record, just as a reminder, there was the amendment on number 3, and I will reread that. Urge Canada to recognize the title of the Algonquin Nation and ensure the Algonquin Nation participates equally in the ongoing process to allow the building to ultimately be used as an Indigenous people space in a manner which reflects and respects the engagement process with First Nations and the protocols of the Algonquin Nation. Was there further comment on microphone 4? The proposed amendment you made to number 2 is accepted.
Okay, that's going to be in number 2?
Yep, it's in number 2.
Thank you.
Is there a need for further discussion on the resolution as amended? We're good? Okay then. Chief Collins, you're good? You're not asking it? Okay, thank you. Then with that, and seeing no need for further discussion, I look to Resolution 20 as amended here on the floor. Are any opposition? Any abstentions? Then, ladies and gentlemen, we're on our way to our embassy. Or whatever they decide to do it. Thank you very much. What's that?
Number 18, you want to do number 18 again? I have the amendments.
Are they ready? You got it?
Yep.
Yep, good.
So we're going to return back to draft resolution number 18, inherent authority to define citizenship. The one aspect that was missing was number 4. So my colleague had read 1 through 3 already. The addition under therefore be it resolved is number 4. Support the amendment to Bill S3 known as 6(1)A all the way that would make Indian women and their descendants eligible for full 6(1)A status and put an end to sexist and arbitrary discrimination within the Indian Act status regime. So I just, did you check with mover and seconder on that? Yeah, I just want to go back to our mover and seconder on that one. For number 18, we have somebody on microphone number 2.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I guess when I look at what we're proposing here is not recognizing 6(1), 6(2) in its entirety. We want to just move with recognizing them and our self-determination on who our members are. When we signed the treaty in 1850, the Crown come and they asked us who our people are. They didn't tell us who our people are. And that's what we're saying by eradicating 6(1), 6(2) in its entirety. And we want to challenge it. And I put that task to our national chief to take on that challenge because he mentioned this in his opening speech about self-determination and who we are. And we must remember the folks and the young ones that have lost their status because of that racial piece of legislation that is imposed upon us.
So from my understanding, therefore, you're in disagreement to the addition to number 4, is that correct?
I am, because the way I look at it, I'm not talking about 6(1) or 6(2). I'm talking about not even recognizing that piece of legislation.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have, all right, so as is, not adding in the friendly amendment. And turning to seconder, okay. Chief Brissett. And do you have any further discussion about, okay, thank you. So as it stands, with therefore be it resolved 1 through 3, as you see on the screen, without the proposed friendly amendment, is there need for any further discussion at this time? Question has been called. Is there any abstentions to resolution number 18? Is there any opposition to resolution number 18? Seeing neither any abstentions or opposition, here, here, and here, with your permission, I declare it passed by consensus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask you to turn your attention to draft resolution 21, and I do want to make a bit of a clarification. Grand Chief Stonefish, Chief Stonefish was speaking to the Deschanel resolution. There were other people that were speaking. The lawyers that I mentioned, Delia and Don, were here to speak to the Natural Resources Transfer Act. So I apologize for that correction, but I continue to thank them for helping us with our time management issues. And so we turn to Lands and Resources, draft resolution 21, the Natural Resources Transfer Act. The Natural Resource Transfer Act represents a significant breach of numbered treaties signed by First Nations in the Crown and the province of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta by purporting to provide authority to the federal Crown to transfer responsibility to the provinces, and further to resolutions in 2012, let it be resolved that the chiefs in Assembly direct the Assembly of First Nations Secretariat to undertake research, assemble background information, and conduct a legal and technical review of the Natural Resources and Transfer Act to support First Nations interested in challenging the NRTA, direct the AFN Secretariat to seek financial resources in order to host a forum on the NRTA for the affected First Nations in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and to include First Nations leadership, elders, and technicians. I just wanted to note I need to make sure that I have a mover and seconder present. Oganu Christian Sinclair and Chief Todd Pagan, are you available in the Assembly? I see here, microphone 2, and I see here in the back of the room. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Is there a need for a discussion? Microphone 2.
Tansi, Honiganu, Christian Sinclair, Opaskwayak Cree Nation. Just want to thank you for allowing us to bring this forward, recognizing that a lot of the challenges that we face today as First Nations across Canada is a result of the federal government handing over these fiduciary responsibilities to the provincial governments. So we had some dialogue with other regions, with other treaties, and we would be open to that, recognizing that we are all affected by this from coast to coast to coast. So we look forward to that building and growing to get traction on this resolution as we move forward.
Thank you. Seeing no need for further discussion. Oh, microphone 2. Chief Brissett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Tom Brissett from Kettle and Stony Point First Nations. One of the things I don't want to do is lose the fact that the pre-Confederation treaties have lost natural resources, and we need to be included in this process as well. We lost a lot of our natural resources, have never been paid or compensated for those, and I think that's how Canada built itself on the back of the resources they took from us. So we sure don't want to be left out when this resolution moves forward. So the mover and seconder, if you would agree, we want the pre-Confederation treaties added into this process as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and so would that be, so essentially where they mentioned it as number 2, is they're directing the Secretariat to host a forum for the affected First Nations, and just add at the end, including pre-Confederation treaties?
Yes, we are in full support of that.
Okay, great. Great, thank you very much. Mover and seconder agree. So we just add at number 2, including pre-Confederation treaties. Microphone 4.
In the province of Ontario, Ontario paid $67,500,000 for the natural resources at the time of Confederation. So I'd like to just add the word at the time of Confederation, pre-Confederation and at the time of Confederation.
So just again, adding at the end, at the time of Confederation.
Yes, pre-Confederation and at the time of Confederation.
Thank you. Mover and seconder? Just continuing at the end of number 2 and at the time of Confederation. Okay? Okay, so we're just expanding the participation is what we're doing there. So I look to see if there's any further need for discussion of the draft resolution 21 as amended on the floor. Seeing none, is there any opposition to this resolution? Are there any abstentions to this resolution? Seeing none, then resolution 21 as amended on the floor is adopted. Thank you.
Turning now to draft resolution number 22. Distinct First Nations Labor Market Strategy. This was moved by Chief Reginald Belrose, which I believe you are still over. Thank you very much. Muscatine First Nation, Saskatchewan, and seconded by Chief Stan Greer. He's over there. Piikani First Nation. I know he was not here earlier, so we're looking for a seconder for this resolution number 22. distinct First Nations labor market strategy. Chief Calvin Sanderson. So moving into the therefore be it resolved. In right, you'll have the English on my left en français. Pour ce motif, le chef en assemblée demande au comité des chefs sur le développement des ressources humaines CCDRH d'établir un groupe de travail technique composé.
Resources development to establish a technical working group to experts that will work with employment of social development Canada officials on the implementation of a new district First Nations labor market strategy. 2. Direct the CCHRD to call on the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Labor to provide the necessary financial supports that will lead to the successful implementation of long-term distinct First Nation labor market strategy before April 1st, 2018, and to provide sufficient time to ensure successful and timely implementation of the new strategy. Alors.
Belrose and Chief Sanderson, is there a need for any up? Microphone number 1, please.
Thank you. Looking for support from the chiefs on this very important file. A lot of work has been going into it. We did a lot in Ottawa over Christmas. I would just ask for one amendment to Section D, and that should include First Nations people are the fastest growing demographic in Canada. If we could add those, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
You would like to start off under the whereas Section D, start off with First Nations people are the largest demographic, fastest growing demographic in Canada, period, and then the recommended approach by the CCHRD outlines necessary.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So noted. And I'm turning to our seconder. He's nodding his head. Thank you very much. He's agreeable to the amendment friendly made by the mover. Any need for further discussion on resolution number 22? Seeing none, is there any abstentions? Seeing none, is there any opposition? Seeing none, I'm happy to declare here as passed by consensus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiefs and Proxies. I turn your attention to draft resolution 29, aquaculture legislative and policy reviews. Chief Dalton Silver and Chief Scott McLeod, are you still present in the Assembly Hall? See that yet? Thank you very much, gentlemen. They are both standing. This one notes that the AFN has reinstituted its National Aquaculture Working Group, notes that there's an incredible complexity depending on species and then levels of government that are involved in terms of that regulatory process, the fact that the Department of Fisheries is developing an aquaculture act in their departmental plans, and so really calling for the need to address outstanding First Nations aquaculture policy items and so therefore the chiefs in Assembly direct the Assembly of First Nations to engage with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to provide the financial resources to the National Aquaculture Working Group that will address existing policy and regulatory reforms, call on the DFO to implement its engagement and consultation process with First Nations at the front end to assess the need for an Aquaculture Act, and direct the AFN to request that DFO work with First Nations to co-draft any legislation regarding a proposed Aquaculture Act, as well as provide the funding required to provide First Nations to engage in technical and legal reviews. Is there a need for discussion of this resolution? Seeing none, may I then move to the question, is there any opposition to Resolution 29? Are there any abstentions to Resolution 29? Seeing none, then with your permission, we declare that Resolution 29 is adopted.
Draft resolution number 30, First Nations engagement and consultation on BC 55, Oceans Act and Marine Protected Area under Fisheries. We have again Chief Dalton Silver, Sumas First Nation, and we have Chief Scott McLeod and the Nipissing First Nation. Did you gentlemen move on me? Oh, there we go, and there we go. Yes, I see you both. Thank you very much. So going directly into therefore be it resolved, if we can have them up, please, and thank you. Pour ces motifs, le chef en Assemblée a joint l'Assemblée des Premières Nations apéyennes de demander au ministre de la Pêche et des Océans, MPO, de présenter son plan de participation pour le projet de loi C-55, loi modifiant la loi sur les océans, la loi fédérale sur les hydrocarbures, et d'indiquer comment les Premières Nations auront la possibilité de collaborer et participer à une véritable consultation et de enjoint à l'APN de demander au ministre des Océans de fournir des ressources financières nécessaires pour créer un groupe de travail des Premières Nations.
To direct the AFN to call to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans to provide financial resources to create First Nations Oceans Work Group on proposed changes to the Oceans Act that will focus on providing technical core support for First Nations to assess impacts of benefits to rights holders in the legislative, regulatory, and policy changes.
And seconders, any changes on that, or we're good to go on this one? Yes, I got a thumbs up. And Dalton Silver, Chief Dalton, we got another thumbs up. Excellent, thank you. We're glad we got this one here intact. Is there any need for any further discussion on draft resolution 30? Seeing none, moving on to question. Is there any abstentions? Seeing none, any opposition? Seeing none, with your permission, I declare it adopted by consensus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiefs and Proxies. Let us turn our attention to Resolution 31, seeking clarification of the mandate and scope of the Prime Minister's Working Group, moved by Chief Hugh Breaker, Seychat First Nation, and Chief Dalton Silver, Sumas First Nation. I see Chief Silver is here. Do we have Chief Breaker or someone to stand in his place? Bob Chamberlain, thank you very much, Chief. Appreciate that. We have that? Essentially, this one is saying that in terms of the federal legislative and policy review and the working group of ministers on that, the relationship between that work and the ongoing environmental and regulatory reviews, including the Fisheries Act, Navigation Protection Act, Canada Environment Assessment Act, and the National Energy Board modernization is unclear. Therefore, be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly call on the Assembly of First Nations to the immediate release of information concerning the mandate and scope of work of the Ministerial Working Group has undertaken to examine the ongoing environmental regulatory reviews, including the Fisheries Act, Navigation Protection Act, Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, and the National Energy Board modernization. 2, urge the AFN to call on the Ministerial Working Group to meet with the AFN to discuss First Nations perspectives and positions respecting the ongoing environmental and regulatory reviews, including the Fisheries Act, Navigation Protection Act, CEAA, and the National Energy Board modernization. And 3, urge the AFN to clarify whether the Ministerial Working Group will be called on to address the inadequacies in the ongoing environmental and regulatory review process. Is there a need for discussion on this resolution? Seeing none, may I move to the question then? And with your permission, is there any opposed to this resolution? Seeing none, are there any abstentions to this resolution? Seeing none, agreed, 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 consensus. Thank you.
Moving on to draft resolution number 32, First Nations trade relations. We're now under the topic of economic development. This resolution 32 was moved by Chief Byron Lewis. We have Chief Ian Campbell, microphone number 4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be Chief Lewis's stunt double today. He couldn't stay, but I'd be happy to move this motion and propose some amendments for consideration.
Okay, and so we're just going to go, we'll just stay right there. We're just going to make sure we have Chief Matilda Rajmatan from the Lennox Island First Nation here with us as well. Do you see? She's gone, so we're looking for a seconder. So, can you remind me again, Wendell, proxy for? Could you just? Thank you. We're just going to have our seconder. Microphone 4, please.
Wendell Nicholas, proxy First Nation, and I'll move that on Chief Matilda's behalf.
Thank you very much. So we have some amendments from the mover.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So under the whereas E, it would read, Indigenous peoples have the inherent and treaty right to trade within and between nations, domestically and internationally, as pursued since time immemorial, including the right to acquire, possess, store, transport, handle, trade, or retain Indigenous manufactured products without restrictions from any foreign government as to quantity or proposed or actual use or disposition. And then continuing on with, therefore be it resolved,
Why
number
don't
two.
I read those ones into the record?
There's some additions here as well.
Okay.
Would you like me to read those?
I can read them on your behalf as the mover, and we just make sure the seconder is good with, and then it's read for the record if it's good to go.
Okay.
So I'll come grab them.
Aha.
Oh. Oh, goody. Chicken scratch is my favorite. So, reading for the record as proposed by the mover under the therefore be it resolved. Therefore be it resolved that Chiefs and Assembly affirm First Nations' inherent right to trade, pursuit of economic growth, and advancement toward greater economic independence. 2, affirm that all international treaties, agreements, and covenants that Canada is a signatory to are subject to First Nations Aboriginal title and rights and to the adherence to and inclusion of all the economic components which exist within First Nations title and rights. 3, direct the Assembly of First Nations AFN with guidance from the Chiefs Committee on Economic Development CCED to undertake a dialogue with First Nations leaders and trade experts regarding the development of a First Nations trade strategy that is grounded in the recognition of First Nations' inherent right to trade and considers inter-nation trade cooperation, understanding economic opportunities by trade agreements, leveraging existing agreements, leveraging First Nations' unique position, First Nations participation in trade negotiation, and establishing First Nations trade capacity. 4, direct the AFN to advocate for First Nations participation in trade initiatives and existing trade mechanisms on the basis of the recognition of First Nations inherent and treaty rights affirmed and protected under Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982, international law and First Nations inherent and treaty rights to trade with and between nations in North America and globally. 5, direct the AFN to call upon the federal government to provide funding to First Nations to support their trade and economic priorities and First Nations trade research, trade development, and trade capacity. 6, direct the AFN National Chief to seek out the necessary resources to develop the institutional support for our direct participation in trade talks, to participate in international trade, foreign direct investment engagement processes to further the objective of this resolution for the benefit of all First Nations. So that is the, hopefully how it was supposed to be read. Thank you. And I'm just turning to our seconder. Number 4, please.
Agreed.
Thank you. So opening the floor to further discussion, do we have any further discussion on draft resolution number 32? Question is called, is there any abstentions? Seeing none, any opposition? Seeing none, with your permission, I declare it adopted by consensus. Thank you. There's 32 there for you.
Thank you very much. I ask you to turn your attention to draft resolution 33. Can-Do Certified Aboriginal Economic Development Designation. Chief Tom Brissett being present, Chief Wayne Christian formerly being sitting here. I didn't see him when I looked. Chief Christian, are you still available? Oh, well, Chief Leonard, you'll second that? Microphone 4.
I'm Bonnie Leonard. I'm proxy for Shuswap Band. Am I moving?
Thank you. You're seconding.
Okay.
Chief Brissett, were you still here?
No, he's not.
Oh, okay. So then there we go. Mover.
Also move. Keith Matthew, proxy holder for Deer Lake First Nation.
Deer Lake, thank you very much, Keith. So properly moved and seconded. Essentially, this one looks to ask the Assembly for continue to reinforce previous support that you provided to the Council for the Advancement of Native Development Officers, as we know as Can-Do, over the last 27 years, particularly as it relates to the increasingly recognition they're receiving for their certification process and the capacity building efforts they do in economic development and wealth creation at the grassroots, community, and regional levels. And so therefore be it resolved that the Chiefs and Assembly support and recognize CANDO's certification process when First Nations are hiring economic development officers, and 2, direct the Assembly of First Nations to call upon the federal government, specifically Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada, to make funding available to First Nations for training in the field of economic development. Microphone 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Keith Matthew again for the record. And I have 2 friendly amendments to the therefore be it resolved by the Chiefs Committee on Economic Development. And it would be adding Clause 3 and Clause 4. So Clause 3 is direct the AFN's Chiefs Committee on Economic Development to work with CANDO to establish a joint technical working committee with the objective of addressing shared areas of interest. The Chiefs Committee on Economic Development and CANDO leadership will oversee this work of the technical committee. And number 4.
Let me just be clear to the delegation. So a brief edit to number 3 to add after the words AFN to add the words Chiefs Committee on Economic Development. Number 4.
Number 4, and this is for the therefore be it resolved, the final clause of the resolution. So number 4, direct the AFN's Chiefs Committee on Economic Development to seek resources to support work with CANDO to jointly conduct research to determine First Nations contribution to the Canadian economy. And I can deliver this to you.
Yeah, and that's good. Those are great. And you're the mover, so that's cool.
Yeah,
Chief Leonard?
It's acceptable amendments.
Excellent. Is there any need for further discussion of the resolution as amended on the floor? Seeing none, is there any opposition to the support resolution for CANDO? Seeing none, are there any abstentions? And then with that, I take your permission to adopt Resolution 33 by consensus. Thank you very much.
Moving on to draft resolution number 35, treaty land entitlement implementation in Manitoba under the subject of treaties, moved by Chief Nelson Janai. And I'm sorry, I'm just looking at that word. So sorry. You hopefully can go to the microphone and tell me how to say your name appropriately, sir. I apologize. I do know Chief Leneku, Saskatchewan First Nation. You were in the room earlier, looking to see if you are still here for a seconder and a mover. Microphone 4, please.
Oh, Chief Nelson Janal from Sapatoyak Cree Nation.
Sapatoyak, thank you so very much, sir, for the education. And do we have Chief Lynn Nakus with us still? I know she was here earlier. I thought I saw her earlier. We're looking therefore for a seconder for draft resolution 35, treaty lands entitlement implementation in Manitoba. So Reginald Belrose, thank you very much, Chief Reginald. Thank you. So turning directly to the therefore be it resolved. On my right will be in English. I will be reading it en français. Pour ce motif, les chefs en assemblée
support the Treaty Land Entitlement Committee, TLEC, as it continues with its efforts to settle and resolve the outstanding treaty business of Treaty Land Entitlement, TLE, in Manitoba. 2, demand that the Canada uphold in honor of the Crown, fulfill its obligations under the treaty, and work with the TLEC and the province of Manitoba to fast-track the TLE land conversion process under the 1997 Manitoba Framework Agreement. 3, direct the National Chief to call to the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada to make the outstanding 2015 Liberal Party of Canada TLE campaign pledge a ministerial priority to incorporate actions on TLE into the direction to officials actioning the Crown's commitments to rights recognitions and implementations to allocate the required departmental resources to make these commitments a reality. Alors maintenant, nous allons...
Comment? Oh, no, okay. Thank you. Is there any need for further discussion on the floor? Seeing none, moving to question, is there any abstentions? Seeing none, any opposition? Seeing none, with your permission, I declare it adopted by consensus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let us turn our attention to draft resolution 35, treaty land entitlement implementation in Manitoba. Oh, sorry.
36.
We're moving fast. Oh, good. I thought I was going to get to say Chief Nelson Denai's name. 37, support for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Chief Reginald Belrose, present to my left. Chief George Cote, Cote First Nation. Are you available in the hall? I see him there in the back of the room to my left. The National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, of course, being established as one of the calls of action for the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, with the mandate to ensure future generations will never forget, and to do some ongoing research, and to broadly educate the public, and to ensure the legacy of Truth and Reconciliation Commission is honored. Therefore, be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly hereby rescind AFN Resolution 61-2016, direct the AFN Secretariat to work with the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation and other parties to the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement to advance the NCTR's mandate, which specifically requires protection of the records through access and privacy legislation, ownership, control, access, and possession principles, and other principles consistent with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And 3, direct the AFN to commit to tri-annual meetings between the AFN Executive and the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation Executive and governing Survivor Circle members to discuss the implementation of the NCTR's mandate. 4, request the NCTR provide an annual update on the activities of the NCTR to the AFN Chiefs in Assembly to ensure matters of strategic or relevant importance are discussed in an open and accountable manner. And 5, direct the AFN to work with the NCTR on matters of mutual interest, including the implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action and principles of reconciliation, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the mutual and respective mandates of the NCTR and the AFN. Mover and seconder being present, being read into the record. Is there a need for discussion of this resolution? Seeing none, is there any, oh, sorry, microphone 1, Chief Belrose, thank you.
Thank you, Harold, much appreciated. I'm going to ask your indulgence to hear Ted Cusan speak to the resolution.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to acknowledge the Chairman and also the co-chair, and also Chief Chapman, Madam Chief Chapman, and Regional Chief McEnroe. You know, since we started, both of this gentleman and this lady were sitting up there. And it makes me proud how concerned that you two leaders are of listening to the concerns and issues and resolutions of this Assembly. So I want to share with everybody how important this resolution is and why this resolution has come to this Assembly. You know, across this country, we're talking about reconciliation. And it's so important. But you know, survivors across the country, representatives from all our regions and different families across this country, were at the Supreme Court of Canada on May 25th. And that's where I talk about reconciliation. We're talking about destroying our records, residential school survivors' records. And you know, I have the highest respect for our former national chief. The highest respect for him. I also have the highest respect for Kathleen Mahoney, who represents survivors under the settlement agreement. And also respect the legal counsel of the Assembly of First Nations. How this went about. And this is why we're asking the chiefs to rescind the resolution from Niagara Falls. How it got to the floor in Niagara Falls, and how us as survivors missed that resolution, which that resolution read for us to destroy our residential school records. And like I said, I respect the former national chief. And if he wants his records destroyed, that's a personal choice that he makes. And I do believe every survivor in this country has that responsibility, and they should make that choice. But the sad part about it, it's after the fact here. It was taken to the